Well, it's my real pleasure to introduce Rob. He's a colleague for a while now, and he's a consultant psychiatrist, consultant forensic psychiatrist, and he's a clinical supervisor and educational supervisor of trainees in Oxford. And excellent to have you with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Alvaro, and thank you for inviting me. Really interesting day. I'm going to take into them from all the talks so far. We were chatting over lunch, and I was saying that I always thought that psychiatry would be the last profession to go because of AI. I thought we'd really survive, but I might be wrong. We might be the first to go. So I'm going to do, I think, similar to what the last couple of speakers have done, and really talk about empathy in a forensic context. There might be slightly more forensic psychiatry than empathy, but hopefully there'll be enough of both. And if I talk for too long, just turn me off, okay? Just turn the screen off if I'm still going. For the first 5 minutes, I'm just going to set the scene a bit, because I think it's helpful to know a little bit about the sort of the history, the socio-political context of forensic psychiatry, so where it came from, where it is, and how it's got to be where it is at the moment, because I think those factors are quite helpful in understanding the challenges to delivering empathic care that we face in various forensic institutions. So what is forensic psychiatry? I mean, at its most basic, the word forensic, one of its meanings is relating to courts of law. So it's applying medical knowledge in a legal setting. So in a court, usually giving advice and expertise to help the court decide what to do. But over the last 50 years, it's really extended to mean the assessment, treatment, and rehabilitation of mentally disordered offenders in different settings. So in secure hospital, within prisons, and within the community. And hopefully we'll talk a bit about each of those areas, because I think there are different challenges in how you deliver sort of ethical, empathic care according to the place in which you're working. I mean, it's been around, the concept of mental disorders having an impact on people committing criminal acts has been around for a long time. So since the 7th or 8th century, I like to think the golden age of forensic psychiatry was in the second half of the 19th century, because we had various cases there. So Pritchard, who is a gentleman who had a learning disability, who was mute, and who was found unfit to plead in court, and we still use that legal test. And Daniel McNaughton, who's the gentleman at the top, he was the case that has led to the insanity rules. So for cases of not guilty by reason of insanity, and those cases are still used today as case law by forensic psychiatrists. Secure hospitals have existed for 200 years. So there were initially secure units at Bethlehem, and then there was Broadmoor Hospital built in the 19th century. And then finally getting a bit closer to the present day, in 1975, there was the Butler Report. And this, at the time, most forensic patients were housed in Broadmoor. So it was a massive, sprawling Victorian estate caring for sort of 1,500 people, generally a long way away from where they were from, often caring for them indefinitely. And the Butler Report led to the closure of much of Broadmoor and the establishment of regional secure units, latterly known as medium secure units. And these sprung up all over the country in the sort of 25 years from the mid-70s to 2000s. After that, there's been quite a large expansion in low secure hospital beds. So what you've actually got is forensic mental health services going in the opposite direction to the general provision of psychiatric care in this country. So generally, there's been a steady decline in the number of hospital beds. There's been an increase for people being cared for in the community. Interestingly, if you look at the prison population, that's gone the other way. So some people argue that now people who were housed in long stay psychiatric wards, a certain proportion of them are now in prison. If you go back to the 50s, the two lines actually cross over. But forensic psychiatry has bucked the trend in terms of it's become more inpatient based. With that, there's a real cost. So I don't know if you can see this, but in just under 10 years ago, there was £1.1 billion spent on secure hospital beds. In 21-22, that had risen to 2.3 billion. And if you look at the graph on the right, so this is from the King's Fund, the purple line at the bottom, that's the spend on secure hospital beds. And then the blue line, the first light blue line, is the spend on non-secure inpatient hospital beds. So the NHS now spends more money on secure hospital beds than beds for all other kinds of mental health patients. So it's an enormous cost, it's an enormous resource. And what you've got are a lot of people being cared for in long-term institutional settings. And with that, what we've seen is there are various challenges to how you deliver care in a caring, safe, empathic way. So for psychiatry, so the last bastion of long-stay inpatient treatment, cares for people generally out of the view of society, generally for a long time. There are high levels of restrictive practice, so almost all patients are subject to the Mental Health Act. They may be subject to other restrictive practices, things like seclusion, long-term segregation, restraint, at times mechanical restraint, high levels of prescribing potent psychopharmacology. So that's one thing that I think has proven to be difficult in terms of delivering empathic care and in terms of scrutinizing those kinds of institutions. I think certain types of offence and psychopathology are relevant. We'll talk a bit about that. So how easy is it to deliver sort of ethical, caring, compassionate, and be empathic to someone who's committed, say, a homicide, or who's offended against children, or who's a sex offender? How do we deliver care at all in prison? So the prisons in this country are, to put it bluntly, in a bit of a mess. They're incredibly hostile, threatening, full of drugs. How do we deliver care in those settings? And then even in its purest form, as a forensic psychiatrist, how does my empathy, how does that influence what I do when I'm making recommendations for the court? Because there's the potential there to cause unintentional, inadvertent harm, actually by being too empathic, which we'll try and talk about as well. So that's the context. Small bit of audience participation. So some of you may have seen this before. So this is the psychopath test. So there's lots of versions of things similar to this. But so a woman goes to her mother's funeral. When she's there, she meets a man she's never met before. They fall head over heels in love with one another. She believes he's her soulmate. But the next day she wakes up, he's gone, and she's lost his number. And the wake's finished. She's got no way of tracking him down. Has that ever happened to anyone? So if you have seen it before, don't shout out. But a few days later, she kills her sister. Question is why?
Together with the guy.
That's very good. That's a non-psychopathic answer.
Oh.
That's very good. Well done.
She felt cross.
That's good news. A non-psychopathic answer as well. If you've got 10 people, normally one of them gets it right. So there's maybe there's one person in who is a psychopath who doesn't want to own up to it.
Will you see her on the news?
Hmm?
So you'll see her on the news.
So you'll see her on the news. You're getting there, not quite. You're still just about okay. So the answer is, well, she does it to arrange another funeral. So we'll come back.
Oh my God.
So that's the true psychopathic answer. So we're all very empathic practitioners, which is why none of us got it. But the idea being, this is it's a silly question, but it's an idea based. She doesn't care. It's not a crime driven by human emotions, revenge, lust, jealousy, envy. It's not driven by any of those. It's a purely procedural outcome. He was there at a funeral. He'll be there if there's another funeral. And there's no conception of what happens to the other. There's no thoughts about the feelings of other people. So the idea is sort of callous, unconcern, and a lack of empathy. And I guess one of the challenges we face is how we work with patients. They've told us. I've never met this patient, but there are those traits that we see, and they can be challenging to us to deal with, and I think challenging to institutions. And I guess we have got some experience of getting it wrong. So A lot of you won't be aware of this, but some of you will. So the Dangerous and Severe Personality Disorder Service. So this was established in the immediate aftermath of the Michael Stone homicide. So he committed a very high-profile hammer murder. So he killed the mother and one daughter of the Russell family. I think one of the daughters survived, went on to become a very famous sort of survivors advocate, worked a lot for charity. It was also the time of Tony Blair. So Tony Blair, amongst other things, was tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. And the idea was that they were going to establish this service called a Dangerous and Severe Personality Disorder Service. So it doesn't exist in any diagnostic manual. But what they did is they set up therapeutic settings, either in prisons or in hospital, and they took patients with a personality disorder, often shortly before they were due to leave prison, and they were told, no, you're now in hospital. You're detained under the Mental Health Act. You can't get out. You're staying indefinitely. That's the way it is. And DSPD ran for sort of the best part of 10 years. And I think what people learned is that when you're trying to treat offenders, when you're trying to reduce their risk, when you're trying to deliver care to them, that's probably not the way to go about it. So in a very restricted environment, very stigmatizing, subject to indeterminate detention, the outcomes were very poor. So the question is, have we learned from some of these perhaps mistakes that we've made in the past? So that's the context. What are the actual challenges about delivering care in forensic settings today? So the majority of care probably is still delivered in secure hospitals. So these are places where, patients are detained under the Mental Health Act. The challenges we see are around repetition of violence, so violence perpetrated against mental health professionals, often again and again, be that physical violence, be that emotional abuse, be that racist abuse. That can lead to emotional distancing among staff and feelings of a lack of control. Some of the challenges we talked about around forming and maintaining a therapeutic alliance. So how do you work with patients who've committed certain types of offences? Generally, we're talking about patients with sort of severe psychotic illnesses or severe personality disorder. So there are challenges, I think, in developing a truly empathic relationship at times. How do you form that relationship with someone who's committed certain types of crimes? And what we can see is that when that happens, is that there's a retreat. There's a lack of investment in genuinely delivering compassionate care and a shift towards a mere focus on process-driven goals. So our target is not to understand this person. Our target is not to help them. Our target is to get through the day without being abused, or our target is to get them to the stage where they can leave and go to the next place. They go to prison or they go to a different secure hospital. And when you get really significant compassion failures, this can lead to, sort of systemic abuses. I think we talked a little bit about it in the last talk around working with patients with a learning disability. But in a forensic setting, you can get abuse of power, you can get misuse of the protocols and policies you have, things like seclusion, things like excessive use of long-term segregation. I don't know if people saw the Edenfield Panorama documentary. So if you haven't, it's worth a watch. So it came out in 2022. It's a bit of a busman's holiday, but it's certainly interesting to see how compassion failure can lead to patient harm. I won't read it out. I was going to put a few clips in, but they're freely available online. And this is what happens when you have a system that breaks down. So where there's compassion fatigue, where there's failures of empathy, where processes overtake care. So lack of value placed on patient and carer voice, closed culture, lack of psychological safety, lack of compassion and empathy about trust leaders, and suppression of concerns being raised. So how do we make sure that secure hospitals do deliver empathic care? They do try and understand. I think we talked a little bit again about this earlier around the importance of relational security and reflective space. So where do I go as a practitioner when I say, well, I'm working with, Bob, the homicidal man who's got schizophrenia, who's killed 3 of his family members? How do I go and deal with those feelings? that generates in me in order to remain compassionate and understanding. I think at times, I'm not going to go into the definitions of empathy. We've had a lot of that, and I'm not enough of an expert. But I think at times, the idea of sort of effective empathy, so the idea that I need to affect match with someone, I need to put myself in their shoes, but retain a sense of separateness. At times, that's really hard. So, if I'm working with someone who's hypersexual, who's a history of child sexual violence, who's committed multiple contact offences against children, it is an effective empathy approach the way to go. It may not be, I think, a compassionate approach, and one where I recognise you are suffering and I want to do something to help it. That may be more appropriate by saying, no, we're going to go down a purely sort of empathy-driven route of care. It's really important, again, earlier talks have spoken about this, but collecting patient outcomes, making sure they're invested in the institution, they understand what they need to do for meaning, hope, and trust. And I think leadership is really important as well. And you have to have values-based leadership. And I think that's something that whenever you look at organizational failures, that's often the one thing that's missing. So is that culture fully embedded? Are people leading and sharing the right vision and values for that organization? Because when you've got these things in place, when you've got the emphasis on relational security, when you've got reflective practice or Schwartz rounds, when you prioritize compassion, when the patients are invested, when those systems are there, when things are going well, you're much more able to deal with the challenges that come when they come in the forms of violence, be it verbal or physical. So prisons, people who aren't from the UK might not know this, but we really like locking people up. So we've got sort of double our population rate of incarceration is double that of, say, Germany. Despite crime rates falling, the prison population continues to rise. Interestingly, the more police officers you recruit, the more people end up in prison, the more crime there is. So, new governments come in, we're going to recruit 30,000 new police officers. That means the prison population is going to rise in 5 years' time. Prisons are in a real state, really, in this country. So there's real problems in retaining and recruiting prison officers. So they're often very young, they're often very inexperienced. Prisons are full of drugs, so drugs and drones are the main risks they face. And prison itself is designed to sort of prohibit emotional expression. So the best way to get through prison is to go in, don't think anything, don't feel anything, keep your head down. Patients come to you and say, Doc, can I have some benzos, or can I have some sedatives or some sleepers? Because I just want to get through this. I want to be sedated. I don't want to feel. So how do we support offenders in an empathic way when actually the whole system that surrounds them is designed to prevent them from doing that themselves? What processes there are, again, tend to be process-driven rather than relational. So ACT is the tool that prison youth assessment, care and custody and teamwork is what the prisons use to manage self-harm and suicidal thinking. If you're on an ACT, you have to carry around a great big orange book with all the details of your care in it. So all the other prisoners know you're on an ACT. And they're often used for fear of consequence rather than as a meaningful intervention to try and prevent future self-harm. I just Googled the last 3 headlines I could find about HMP Bullingdon. So HMP Bullingdon is our local remand prison. So it's on the Buckinghamshire-Oxfordshire border. So more volatile than ever. Large quantities of assaults on staff. It's dropped off the bomb. Officers are on a power trip. Diabolical institution. So there is a real crisis. And as mental health professionals, we go into this place and we try and deliver care to prisoners in there in an empathic way. And how do we go about doing that? And probably more importantly, because I don't think we can really, I think you're fighting against the tides. You're there for a day a week, trying to change a culture which is oppressive and which is designed on suppressing emotional states. What we probably need to do is think about sort of cultural change within the prisons. How do we make the criminal justice system more effective? How do we make it more therapeutic? Because at the moment, there are places which predispose to violence and poor mental health. The majority of prisoners have a mental health problem, one or the other. And again, there's a tendency to see prisoners not necessarily as people with a set of needs, rather than as a challenge. And there's been a lot of talk about the long wait within forensic psychiatry. So this is the idea that prisoners with mental health needs are neglected. They're not prioritised to come to hospital. There are lengthy waits. People who are acutely mentally ill are sat in prison often for, 3 or 4 times the amount of time they should before they come to hospital. And again, I think this is reflective of a system which has lost an eye on sort of care, and it's more focused on resource. So we almost need to protect our hospital. We can't admit people. Our function is to gatekeep people out rather than to admit them in. So that's the context. I haven't got enough time to talk about how to solve the criminal justice system and how to make it more empathic. We'd be here all day, here all year. But there is something about challenging preconceptions. So there's lots of evidence that when people do engage, meaningfully engage with people who've been convicted of serious offences, so sex offences, those convicted of homicide, their actually empathy towards offenders as a whole is increased. I think as a society, we need to think about what we want prison to do if we want to care for people and help them change. So prison has various functions. It's supposed to protect the public. It is supposed to punish people. It's supposed to punish people by depriving them of their liberty, not by giving them crap healthcare. And it's supposed to rehabilitate. And do we focus enough on rehabilitation? The answer at the moment in this country is certainly no. And then the concept of restorative justice. So this may be familiar to you, but the idea that meaningful restorative practice is much more effective than merely punishment. So allowing some kind of contact between victims and perpetrators in a meaningful way that gives the victim satisfaction, that confronts the offender with what they've done, but in a way that they can then use to make positive change, in a way that instills confidence in the criminal justice system, i.e. what needs to happen is you need to make consciously empathic actions around repairing the harms rather than doing what we do now as a culture, focusing on the rules that have been broken and punishing people as a result. And I think this is my last one. So I like to think of myself as fairly empathic, fairly compassionate. I like to work with patients. When I see someone for the court, that's not really relevant. So I will see people once, maybe twice. And my job, what the court wants to know is this person not guilty by reason of insanity? Is this person fit to go to court? Should this person go to hospital? And although you will prep people, you will say to them, well, look, I'm going to ask you, do you give consent for me to use your information in this way? This is the purpose of the assessment. How deeply is that understood? Because when I'm talking to someone, what they say to me could potentially have a very negative impact on them. So if I go in with a therapeutic mindset, so I want to be empathic, I want to understand you, I want to get into your state of mind at the time that this happened, and that's what happens. Does the person truly know that what they're saying to me could have very real consequences? It could mean they're convicted of a crime. It could mean they go to prison. It could mean something else. I think it's important to note that sometimes, there's a balance, because what you want to do is understand their narrative. You need to understand their narrative in a sort of holistic way to make sense to the court. But you don't want to go beyond that, because if you do slip into, a fully, sort of compassion-based model, you may end up causing harm or doing something that you've not been instructed to do. And I think that's it. So, conclusion, I think there are some relatively unique challenges in delivering empathic care to forensic patients by nature of the mental disorders they suffer from and offences. I think this can be compounded by the places that we do it. And the solutions we've talked about a bit. So at times, I think compassion is more relevant than empathy. I think it's important to emphasize relational over physical security and recognize and address trauma. This is just a little schematic of what's happened. And I think to an extent, forensic professionals are learning about this. For the start, we got it to the Butler report. We got to DSPD. So DSPD stopped, and then we replaced that with the offender personality disorder pathway. So the idea that we could deliver health-based interventions to a wider population of offenders rather than the very small number who went to DSPD. So that was generally, I think, it's a good idea. It runs all through the criminal justice system and into the community. In 2021, provider collaboratives were developed with a view to sending fewer patients to secure hospital. And then in 2023, we developed specialized community forensic teams, the idea that more care is going to be delivered in the community, less within institutions. So I think the sort of drive and narrative is towards delivering care outside of these institutions and being more equitable across the criminal justice system. But I guess forensic psychiatry remains very subject to sort of political pressures. So things like the Valdo Calacane case has probably made compassionate forensic care put it back 20 years, because there's a view that actually there are these dangerous people out there who need to be locked up. And should there be a capacity-based mental health act? Should there be an approach whereby we help people try to achieve their liberty again? So yeah, we'll see. And I think that's it.